But the title of my presentation is IoT Data Engine Powering the Airport of the Future. Well, what does the future look like? I've got some ideas. Fly me to the moon. Let's play among the stars. You and I together in Mercury and Mars. In other words, please be true. The future's coming. And we're talking a lot about airports and just getting basic data in. But just a few months ago, Elon Musk announced they have the first passenger that they're going to take into space sometime this year. Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' company, talking about test flights to start taking travelers into space. We're talking about just putting sensors on walkways, and pretty soon we need launch pads at the airport. Are we going to need, because they're going to need luggage, they're going to need ticketing, they're going to need all the things that our airports need today. And Richard Branson said, look, we're all competing for this new industry, this new space. So travel's going to go well beyond getting from London to Paris or New York to LA. It's going to go well beyond that. So I thought, well, these guys are thinking way out of the box. Let's be inspired by them this morning as we get started. So Jeff Bezos, it's not an experiment if you know it's going to work. The second quote had nothing to do with business, but I had to throw it in. When he talks about his wife, he said, I want a woman that could break me out of a third world prison. Life's too short to spend time with people that aren't that resourceful. And as I think about the kind of things we're trying to do at airports and with facilities and Internet of Things, that resonated. Elon Musk, failure is an option. Failure's okay. The most important thing is that we do it, that we get started. Optimism, pessimism, hey, we're going to do it anyway. Let's go. And then finally, Richard Branson, I loved the idea, it's not just the cheapest way to get there. It's about what's going to provide the most adventure, what's going to provide the most learning, what's going to give us the most fulfillment as we try to solve for the future. And ultimately, at the end of the day, screw it, let's do it. And I spend so much time with clients trying to think about getting it right, getting it perfect out of the gate. And in this brave new world, it's all about getting started and get things going. So let's bring it down to earth. You guys know this better than I do. I was curious after Nigel's presentation yesterday, so I Googled it this morning. Less than 18% of the global population has flown. That just shocked me. So there's a whole lot of capacity yet to get on the airplanes that we're all thinking about. And data is the key asset that we're going to use to figure it all out. There's so many ways to think about data. You know, how do we begin to better understand the traffic flow of the planes, the cars coming into the airport, the passengers traversing the airport? How do we also, we heard from the Weather Channel yesterday, weather, how disruptive that can be. How do we react real time, agilely, to be able to adapt to things that are out of our control? And it's not just using your data, it's using all the data available. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. There's so much data already out there, so it's not just these new opportunities to generate data, but there's all the existing data, and how do we bring it all together, as Nils started out this morning. So the more data, the better. You can't have enough data. One of the challenges we're going to start to hear about is, what is my cost per datum? As I get all of this data and I accumulate it, a datum, a single cell of data, we hear so much about data transformation projects, data homogenization, reformatting, and all these big costs get in the way of getting that individual granular piece of raw material so that I can pull it all together. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's not that easy bringing all this data together. And we started to touch on this yesterday. Who owns the data? Is it my data? Is it yours? With all kinds of things around. Is it regulated? Financial or healthcare data? Some of the examples, Nest thermostat owned by Apple. Nest is not willing to give the consumer that data. Wait a minute, it's my home. I bought the thermostat. I want my thermostat to talk to a lot of other products, a lot of other things in my home. We were doing a big smart building project in Philadelphia, and we had all kinds of sensors throughout the building. we had smart parking. Otis got in the way. Otis owned the elevator. We said, look, we need all the elevator information. Can't have it. That's why I asked the Coney guys that question yesterday. Who owns that data? The elevator's interesting. The moving escalator's interesting. It's one spoke on a very complex bicycle wheel. And I'm responsible for the wheel. And Otis is sitting there saying, oh no, I'm sorry, my spoke is the most important. So how do we begin to pull that data together? Finally, at BMW, I spoke at BMW recently to their senior management team. You put a Bosch engine control unit in the car. BMW sells the car. You lease it. Is that your data? Is it the leasing companies? You'd like to share it with your insurance company? You'd like to share it with your service company? Who owns that data gets really complex. And so increasingly, all the data coming together, we need to be able to share it seamlessly and figure out how to solve for all those complex problems. But everybody wants the data. So there's the obvious, right? Management wants the data, tenants want the data, the people renting the stores, the retail part of the airport. Also, the regulatory partners want a lot of that information. But also, there's a lot of other folks that might be interested. Consumer products. Wouldn't Toomey or Rimowa love to know every time one of their bags jams the luggage cart? Couldn't you sell a lot of that information to the whole ecosystem to begin thinking about how to pull it together? And once we have all of this data, it begins leading to these insights. How to generate more revenue. There's a man named Don DeLoche. He wrote a book called The First Receiver with Gartner, and he talks about the future of IoT, and he talks about the first receiver. And his premise is that the original generation of data, a single piece of data, it's usually designed and assumed that there's a one-to-one ownership between the generation of the data and the owner. What if there are many other constituents downstream that want to consume that data as well? And his hypothesis is the value created downstream far exceeds the first receiver. So this idea of generating more revenue out of your data, right now people tend to think about the cost and the complexity, but it creates tremendous new value. Once I've got that data from my facilities, but also integrating it with everything else, the ability to measure, predict, and forecast at a very granular level on a lot of things that today I think are out of my control, like the weather. To master standards within the organization then, something that one of our airport clients calls their daily playlist. Being able to proactively get better at their daily playlist of, okay, what are we going to deal with today running this airport? What are all the variables? How do we get all the pieces communicating and working together? So at the end of the day, it's all about data. In the last few years, and this was mentioned a couple times yesterday, where some folks said the technology just wasn't there 5 years ago. Right now, low power WAN, I don't care if it's Zigbee, LoRa, 4G or 5G NB, the idea that we're going to get these long range sensors with low power, i.e. a battery life of 5 and 10 years, low cost, a lot of these sensors are going to come under 15 pounds. Suddenly, at that price point, I'm going to put a sensor on everything. If I have to think about spending hundreds of dollars for a sensor, hundreds of pounds a year to have it communicate, it becomes a bit of a complex decision. But at this price point, I don't care. I can start censoring every dog, cat, kid, manhole cover, soap dispenser, toilet seat, refrigerator door, luggage cart. Everything can have sensors on it. This is fundamentally changing the economics of how we create these smart buildings and these smart facilities. And at the end of the day, no matter what technology you're using, as the prices plummet, and no one size fits all, you're going to have Bluetooth beacons, you're going to have Wi-Fi, you're going to have 4G or 5G, you're going to have Ethernet for video. So you're going to be capturing all of this data. You're going to put it in a standard platform, Watson IoT, Azure, it doesn't matter, pick your flavor of choice. But basically plugging all this data together so I can begin bringing it in and driving real-time applications, real-time AI. So with that, Smart Airports, we have one of the largest airports in the United States has become a client. This is the things that they're looking for. How do we improve the experience? Very similar to what we heard yesterday. Aircraft preparation, all the moving pieces of things that need to get to that airplane, catering, fuel, mechanics, where are those assets? Right now they're not being tracked real time. So how do I know exactly where all my assets are in the facility? Baggage handling, we all experience that. And I learned a lot from this client about cargo handling, how competitive that is. And if they can get really aggressive on cold storage and how to track and maintain and guarantee that a product has never deviated from a certain temperature, from truck arrival to airport boarding to flight to unloading, that's a big strategic advantage and something that they're looking for. So when I think about smart airports, they really fall into two buckets. The first is tactical. A lot of people like to talk about cost savings. That's great. And by the way, you're going to get cost savings, you're going to get efficiencies, but the strategic, how I begin to rethink the airport, how I begin to rethink its design, how I begin to rethink new revenue streams coming out of this data, all the things that I can do to start repackaging and repurposing that data. We talked to Thomson Reuters, who wants to buy as much data as anybody can produce. And I said, well, what is data, what will you give me? Up to $250,000 per month per data stream. Whoa. I've talked to people that said, oh no, this data is mine, it's proprietary, it's locked down, I could never share it. Oh, $250,000 a month? Let's talk about it. So this idea of beginning to think about what do I do strategically with the data to jumpstart and change the direction of where we're going. In the meantime, all this stuff is great and you got to get started. I think that's one of the key messages that I want to leave with everybody. You got to get started now. There are no wrong answers. A lot of people are tied up with, gee, should it be LoRa? Should it be Wi-Fi? Should it be Bluetooth? That's not the question you should be asking. As soon as you start getting data, the sooner you begin to realize some of the strategic value that can be derived out of that. So with that, I've got some tactical things to get started with. Some of this is repetitive from yesterday, so I won't go through them in a lot of detail, but these are things that we're doing right now and being asked to do for some airports in the US. Predictive cleaning. We touched on this a little bit yesterday, but I've got a little bit of a different spin. We actually went to an airport that already paid for a predictive cleaning solution. It was installed, it was working. They asked us to tear it out and put a different one in. Why? They wanted to marry that data with things like the weather. Guess what? When it's snowing outside, the bathrooms get dirtier. When the airline schedule changes, it turns out there are some restrooms that aren't even being used at all and other ones that are an absolute mess. They found new sensors that they wanted to incorporate that allowed them to measure how full the trash cans were. The siloed single solution couldn't accommodate any of those requests. So they asked us to come in and put in a predictive cleaning using LoRa in this particular case, where we can now integrate lots of other sensors and, oh, by the way, seamlessly bring in the Weather Channel and seamlessly bring in flight scheduling. Gives them a much more robust granular control of something as simple as that. Oh, by the way, the company that does this gets paid on customer satisfaction. We also, you see these, red, yellow, green smiley face. Now you can start putting them everywhere. They're cheap, you set them up, and so now being able to capture real-time customer feedback matters a lot in this particular case. We heard a lot about smart parking. This airport has an interesting view on revenue generation. They have short-term parking that's an hour. They want to know exactly when that hour's up because they're out there giving a ticket, and it's a really expensive ticket. And so for them, that's a revenue generator. But then we started talking about, based on the experience we've had with our other client, what if we were to take parking and begin marrying that with check-in? In the smart building example that I talked about, we wanted to take smart parking, marry the data with security, and marry the data with the elevator system. So when VIPs are showing up, I know they're arriving, they're in their parking spot, the elevator's waiting for them, security's already cleared, and the elevator's ready to take them exactly to their floor. And that's the one that Otis got in the way of. Smart parking, same thing. The low-hanging fruit, hey, let's just track the parking right now and generate more revenue. The strategic opportunity is to begin to do some of the stuff we heard yesterday about from home to destination, taking the friction out all along the way. Asset monitoring, we heard this one yesterday as well. Vibration. Being able to have predictive maintenance. I was hoping Nigel would be here because I wanted to share with him that I got stuck in an elevator at Heathrow. And I got stuck in the elevator with an old woman in a wheelchair and her whole family, none of whom spoke English, a guy in a bicycle, and a newly married couple. And I know this because we had an hour and 15 minutes together to get to know one another. And I really wished that somebody had a sensor on that and fixed it before I got stuck in that elevator. Terminal 3, by the way, it wasn't Terminal 5. So there's, again, these are very low cost sensors. You can begin to overthink these solutions. These are sensors in the 15, 20 pound range, battery power. All you gotta do is stick them on and you're capturing that data. So again, it's easy to get started. Asset geolocation. There's really several on this one. The first one is all your vehicles outside. There's lots of low-cost ways to solve this using GPS, but then when we get an indoor, there's all kinds of really good low-power solutions using low-power sensors, whether they be LoRa, combined with Bluetooth, and being able to track luggage carts, wheelchairs, all the assets inside the airport. And so being able to then bring it together on a map, and we saw examples of this yesterday with some of the folks that have integrated in Maximo already, and how they're bringing these asset maps together. And that's a great start. So again, if my goal is to capture as much data as possible so I can begin to track, these become very easy to do solutions. Space utilization. It's very similar here in the UK. These airports were designed with a big check-in space. Now we don't need check-in. Now we all check in on our phones and just show up at the airport. And then we've squeezed all of this security into these very tiny, narrow hallways. And so it's an absolute mess. And so trying to take the existing footprint that we have, how do we optimize that real estate today without having to necessarily go for the big build options of the future? And sometimes these are interim solutions. At the core, what we find very consistent between commercial buildings and commercial retail and commercial airports is you don't have the data to show exactly what's being used, how it's being used, when the traffic jams occur, how do I begin to optimize? And so using some very simple sensors to track footfall, to track flow becomes, again, it gives me that data that I need to marry it with everything else. Wouldn't it be interesting to see correlations between traffic data, rail data, weather data, and my airport data? Are there early predictors that tell me that I know I'm going to have a traffic jam of travelers in a particular area 2 hours before it happens? Can't do that if I don't have the data and pulling it all together. Finally, waste management. This is growing in popularity as well. The idea that we go and look at every trash can on a scheduled time to empty them, as opposed to just going and emptying what's filled when it needs to be emptied. Again, lower cost, much better service. And then cold chain monitoring, being able to, in this particular airport's case, they're very keen to know that the product's coming through the system, there's never been any significant deviation in temperature. Low cost sensors, low cost solutions, capturing the data, beginning to give them that strategic advantage. So when we start thinking about bringing all this data together, that's great, but again, I can't emphasize enough, if you focus on cost savings, you will cost save yourself out of relevance. It's all about new revenue generation. It's about new strategic advantage. It's about new offerings. That's the path for higher margin, higher growth, and moving forward. So we've spent time talking to this client about baggage pickup and delivery at home, and this was brought up yesterday. I thought it was great that the idea that I'm going to use my smartphone, take a picture of my piece of luggage, and you already know exactly what I'm showing up with. You also know that I'm leaving my home now. You also know that probably I'm an hour and 12 minutes away because you tied me into Google Traffic and you figured out when I'm going to arrive. That is brilliant. So being able to bring all of those disparate pieces together. Premium parking services tied to that. Tell me before I leave home, I'm going to level B, parking lot 12, slot 12. It's waiting for me. I don't have to drive around and look for it. It's fully integrated and it's there. You can even have me pay a premium for that. Data sales, retailers, the margin in an airport on a retail merchandise is higher than if this store is down on German Street. And so these merchants and these companies really want to know how many people are stopping into my store. What if I'm tracking footfall into the Thomas Pink store at Heathrow, but I'm also tracking against foot flow, and I know the exact number of people in the entire terminal at that moment in time? How does people at Thomas Pink know? Are we doing great or aren't we? Only 10 people came in today between 11 and 12. Yeah, but maybe there were 20 flights canceled. So how do I put all this in relation? And oh, by the way, if I've got that data, I can start to think about charging a premium to a lot of my retailers based on traffic at the airport, based on flow. But again, I need the data to do it. The city, the region, everybody wants to know what's going on at the airport, right? Thomson Reuters, folks like that, it's all about economic indicators. Is a region growing or not? There's lots of ways to think about monetizing just the overall traffic being generated at your airport. All the suppliers. I take that predictive cleaning and I roll it now back to the people supplying the soap, the paper towels, the hair dryers, hand dryers, all those types of services. So there's lots of ways in the supply chain that you can do that. I mentioned before earlier, Ramoa, they would love that data. We're doing some work right now with somebody that's doing something similar in the consumer home. And they now know when your refrigerator's about to go bad and how often it runs and how often you use your hair dryer, how often you use your iron. Think about the manufacturers of those products dying to know at that level of detail how these products are being used. So things like that, and ultimately the data mart. As all this data comes together, there's the opportunity, you as the airport may want to buy data from other people. You may have data you want to sell. And so creating this exchange where data, real time, batch is nice, being able to do, historical AI analysis is great, but how do you bring these up into a real time ingestion and sharing to create this value? So, screw it, let's get going, right? How do you get going? How do you start? I think you just look for some low-hanging fruit. There's lots of low-cost, fast, easy to get going. You need to start understanding data. You need to start understanding, bringing in these new sources of data, and how do I marry it with my old existing sources of data to create these new insights. So low-hanging fruit, begin to learn, integrating it in with your old legacy accounting systems, ERP systems, CRM systems, whatever it may be. That's how to get started. There's no way you can think through a roadmap over the next 3 years of how you're going to deploy this. It's just there's too many variables and there's too many new things coming down the pike that we don't know about. My partner is part of the LoRa Alliance. We see sensors that aren't on the market yet. Some of the stuff that's coming out is mind-blowing. And it's not even on your radar screen yet, and it would fundamentally change the way you think about. Imagine being able to just print a simple ticket with a normal printer that's got a battery-powered sensor in it. You're going to track that passenger geolocation, exactly where they go for the entire time. Imagine being able to do the same thing with a piece of luggage when I check in, and you put a sticker on it, and now my phone tracks exactly where my luggage is at all times, both in Philadelphia and in London and in anywhere in between. Oh, for about 2 pennies, half a penny per sticker. These things are all these are coming out very soon. And so you can't design a 3-year plan when innovation is happening that quickly. Again, you've got to jump in and get started. So this is my commercial. This is what Microshare does. We have a platform that ingests, annotates, and shares data from any source, legacy and IoT. Got some patents around it. That's what we do for a living. So as I think about leaving you with some advice of how to get started, we talked about a phased approach, simple, low cost. If any of you have use it or lose it money between now and the end of the year, come find me. We're the company that can help you do that. And that's all I have to say. Thanks.